Hey, welcome everybody. I'd like to welcome my buddy Dave Greene. He's worked as a AAA game developer and an indie developer for quite a long time. He's also really experienced at building startups. He's built quite a few of them and kind of crazy things like virtual reality electric chairs. Anyway, welcome Dave. I really appreciate you coming on here and helping share some of your experience with everybody. Today we're going to talk about getting a job in game development and creating your own startup. So
yeah. Thanks for having me, Dave. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So yeah, you want to tell everybody a little bit about what you're doing now, and then we'll dive into some of these subjects?
Yeah, sure. So I've been a developer for about 20 years now, building various startups over the time. But all the way during that time, I've always wanted to build a company that had you super immersed into what you're actually experiencing. And ever since VR's come around for the second time, I remember first playing it back in '91 at a conference when it was all blocky, but still wonderful. Now VR's on its second generation, pumping through. It basically spurred me on again to build something that would be hyper realistic for people to experience. So developed Altered Mechanics, which is my latest startup, one that I'm very passionate about. I've been wanting to build for quite a while. Enables simulators, that's full motion simulators for you to get in and experience, whether that be mech-based battles, turret-based battles, super fast races. We also do room-based shooters because I've always wanted to experience an FPS in virtual reality, one that fit my kind of warped and strange imagination that came with it. So basically most of my stuff comes out and it's pretty crazy, but yeah, I like to take things to the extreme.
Nice. Yeah, I've seen that simulator too, and it is awesome. It's really a cool feeling when you're in there walking around in a mech, and with that, the physical stuff you've got there, it gives that real immersion. Like you feel like you're really in a mech, which is crazy. It's just that combined with the VR headset just kind of pushes it over the top. So I'm excited to see when the thing's all released and out and all the games are out. It's gonna be awesome.
And that's the idea, yeah. Basically, the immersion where we've got articulated arms that you put yourself into, and you can basically really feel like you're running that mech through the game and busting the hell out of other mechs.
Yeah, that stuff is crazy, dude. I love it. And that electric chair too that I just kind of lightly mentioned at the beginning. Can you tell everybody what that was real quick? Because I'm sure there's going to be people wondering.
Yeah, so that goes all the way back to a hackathon where I wanted to experiment to see how far I could push horror in VR. And not just jump scares, because I don't do jump scares, they just kind of bore me. I wanted to go for something that really would scare the hell out of somebody before they even got into the experience. So what I did is I came up with a design for a chair that would actually electrocute you. Now, you know, not serious electrocution, but when you were immersed in the VR headset world and you basically had somebody ready to pull the switch on you, the slight shock that I would give you from the actual chair itself, and it was perfectly safe, would basically take you over the edge and lead you to a real horrifying experience. And that's what I wanted to do with that, build something truly psychological that got to you. And it did. A lot of people scared the hell out of them. A lot of people wouldn't even get in it because it was a physical-based chair. When you looked at it, it looked like something from a prison. It was an electrocution chair, and you could get strapped down to it if you wished to. And you knew it was going to shock you because you heard the person scream from just before when you were getting into it. So you can see more about that on a website I have called warpedimagination.com, which is my consultancy company. And there's a section on there that talks about some of the crazy stuff I've done and also some of the startups I've done. Also some of the stuff about building a VR setup for a room if you want to have retracting cords, etc., pull away from you and all the rest of it.
Nice. Yeah, I saw people get terrified in there. I got a little terrified myself when I was in there. The force feedback vest that was pumping on my heart and hands strapped down. It was crazy. It was really intense, and it was probably one of the coolest VR experiences I've gone through. I wouldn't recommend it for everybody, but if you're a little bit brave and don't have a heart condition, it was awesome. Definitely worth trying out.
First time in VR, probably not the best bet because it will give you a horrible impression of VR when you leave, just from the fact you've been scared to hell out of it.
Definitely agree there. Yeah, don't do that for your first VR thing.
Go
Don't do
play
anything
something
too
fluffy.
terrifying.
Yeah, go play something fluffy and then come and give it a go. It
Yeah, and
doesn't.
that's actually where we met, was working on VR projects at hackathons.
That's right. Yeah, I still love doing hackathons, and I've been doing them for years and years and years. And you meet really cool, interesting people, and I can't recommend them enough. And funnily enough, yeah, we met at Hackathon with a few other groups that were getting together in Orange County in California. And we shared a similar background. You were at Sony doing AAA for about 7 years, when over here, when I was over the pond in London doing Sony AAA there. So we had a similar background in that sense. So we kicked it off.
Yeah, it was very similar. It was fun though. I love going to these hackathons and meeting people, and like meeting you, and making new friends and learning new stuff. So it's a blast.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I do when I go to hackathons is look out for potential people that can come work for me at whatever company or startup I'm working for, or maybe a client that I have that's building another startup. I might find somebody at a hackathon that really suits what they do. And also hackathons tend to, everybody's guard goes down because they're having fun, and you can see the real interest of the person rather than the false persona that a lot of people put up before they come into a job interview, which if you're a good interviewer, you can soon break down. But when somebody's doing 48 hours hack, at the 47th hour, you get to see the real them, which makes a good impression. And yeah, I've hired people from hackathons and from various colleges and universities that I've gone and helped chat to or given lectures at.
Nice. What kind of stuff do you, I think I know, but what kind of stuff do you look for when you're looking at these developers at hackathons? Like, what makes you consider that you might want to hire them to work with you, or you might want to recommend them to somebody else? Like, are there specific things that they're doing or traits, or?
Well, firstly, somebody that will go to a hackathon in the first place tends to have an interest in the industry anyway, because they don't expect to be getting, interviewed at that sort of place. They just expect to turn up and build something cool and build it with like-minded people. So that is a good tick in the box straight away, because you know that they enjoy what they do. Another thing to do is look at what they're building, how they're building it, what their thought processes are, etc. It's very hard when you do an interview in the short period of time, whether that be an hour through to a whole day. I've done a whole day interview before, to basically work out where somebody lies, what they take, what their interests are, etc. And when you build a team for a company, it's not just about how good the person is at doing a particular job, it's also whether they gel with the team. And one of the things I pride myself in is building teams that get along really well. And nearly all the people that I've hired over the years still work for those various companies that I hired them into, simply because I looked at them from a team perspective. And I tend to work on projects that are exciting because I can't be bothered to do the boring stuff anymore. So yeah, those people tend to stick on. Now, the thing I would say to a lot of people that are looking outside of the hackathon and all the rest of what they're looking to do is basically, it's one word over and over again: portfolio, portfolio, portfolio. A lot of companies these days are removing the need for degrees or college courses on paper or anything like that. They're looking more to what experience have you had? What are you willing to do to get this particular job? How much interest have you in that job? And this isn't just the games industry, the film industry and the TV industry do it as well. And even for coders, getting a website up, having a blog, having an open GitHub, going onto the asset store and buying yourself, or even getting the free assets that come with something like Unity or Unreal and putting stuff together. There's no excuse these days not to have something to show to an interviewer. And a lot of times I won't even bother interviewing somebody unless they have something I can see beforehand, because the other 10, 20, or even 100 people that have applied for that particular position have that stuff online. So even the students that I meet at a lot of these things, I tell them, go and create something, put it online, show what you're interested in, go on Reddit, talk about what you're working on, go to hackathons, build up your experience from that. That's what you need to break into this industry. If you try and get a job at Blizzard or anything like that with just, I went to this university course and have nothing else to say about yourself, you're not going to get a job there. There's 1,000 people applying for all those particular positions. So get yourself something that's really good. And remember, there are thousands of people that apply for these positions. So don't be disheartened if you don't get that position straight away. Keep working at it. Get as much feedback as you can and build that portfolio that you're showing at these places. And, the portfolio doesn't just have to be, oh, well, I learned how to do this and now I'm showing this here. Build yourself an indie game. Have some fun with it. Come up with something cheesy or something funny. It doesn't have to be unique. Maybe copy your favorite indie game you see, but put a spin on it, and then put it out there. You might even make a little bit of money, or you might make some progress on just how good you look in the industry just from putting that thing up. So make sure you have some fun with it as well.
Yeah, I think that's all great advice. Like the portfolio thing, especially, because I had the same experience when I see people apply. First thing I do is look at the portfolio link. If it's not there, I'll just go to the next resume. Eventually, I'll go back to those other ones and look and see if they just stand out. But usually, it's just going through that portfolio link to see what they've built, because it's a whole lot easier to tell what people are capable of building by looking at what they've already built than reading a couple bullet points and self-written paragraphs about themselves, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the stuff doesn't have to be perfect that you put up. No coder, no developer is perfect with the stuff they put up. If you put something up that you're doing in your spare time and you get an hour to do a week or anything like that, nobody's going to expect it to be the best thing that they've ever seen. They're looking for, can we take what you are and mold you into something that really works in our group, in our team? Are you going to be an innovator that helps push this team along? When you're looking at the more senior roles, all those sort of things are beneficial. And also make sure you've got a good presence on things like LinkedIn or angel.co, AngelList, just to show what other stuff you've got. A lot of people expect you to have a portfolio just on LinkedIn of, I was at this company, I did this thing, I had this course or whatever. And you can link your website to that as well. So that helps out. And plus recruiters are constantly pilfering across that stuff to try and find people.
Oh yeah, you definitely just fill in the profile there for sure, and link it, because you're right, recruiters are there, and some bigger companies I've seen just go straight there. Like some of the bigger, more corporate places, that's just where they look first. Not that most of those are hiring for games, but they're still a good thing to have.
And if you're a contractor, it's essential to have that thing up there, because everybody's going to want it, basically.
Nice. So, speaking of contracting, would you recommend for people, I guess, getting into the industry to look at contracting first, or look at getting a full-time job?
To and fro's. And your mileage may vary, whoever's listening to this, as to how well you go about this and your location and how it works out, etc. But contracting tends to be, if a company's hiring a contractor to do a particular job, they don't expect to teach you how to do that particular job. They don't expect you to have to go away and learn everything before you build it for them. They expect you to already have experience doing that stuff. So a lot of times, if you don't have the experience and you try to run out to be a contractor, you can find problems with trying to get those particular jobs. Sometimes companies are willing to just take on some people to basically build up what they're doing, but 9 out of 10 times they just want you to hit the ground running. So contracting for beginners, I don't recommend as much. Get some experience under your belt before you go and do it. Now, this experience could be your own experience. If you go out and build 15 AR apps or even one really good AR app, and then you've got a company that's looking to hire an AR person, that is your experience that you can show. It doesn't have to be for a company. But if you don't have that particular experience and you apply to do the job, they kind of expect you just to get going on the job. They're not going to pay you to learn how to do that thing. So that's really where to draw the line as far as I see it.
Yeah, that makes sense, because they will end up firing you. I mean, I've seen people do that before. They get contracts and they can't actually do the thing. They're not sure how to do it, and they just kind of struggle through until it falls apart and becomes, a disaster for both sides. So.
And it can be a legal issue as well when it falls apart and becomes a disaster for both sides. If you said you had the experience turn up and can't do the actual thing you said you could do, and blatantly can't do that, they're not going to want to pay you. And if you've got any sort of advance payment on your contracts or anything like that, that can be a real problem area for them. It doesn't happen every day, so that's fine. But you go in there knowing you can do the job when you're going to do the job.
Yeah, that's what I like to prefer, contracts that seem to me like they're going to be super easy, right? Because I know that I'm not at risk of failing and not delivering.
Yeah, what contractor doesn't is, it's great when somebody gives you a shout and asks you to do something that you just happen to do 1 billion times a day or whatever as a coder. Somebody turns up and says, we want you to create a touring app or something like that. You're like, well, great, I can bang those out with ease 7 days a week. So yeah, no, they're awesome. You do get the odd contract that comes in for something that's never been done before, and I've done a few of those. But again, they still expect there to be a basis of understanding of the different components that go into making that particular thing that you're going to do.
Yeah, definitely have a plan for how you're going to do the whole thing before you accept it.
Oh yeah, and this is the other thing with looking at whether you're going to get paid by the hour or the day versus getting a full payment for the entire project in advance. If you're unsure about that project at all and you take a full payment in advance, you have to deliver that project, and that can be problematic. I tend to lean towards companies that are going to pay me by the hour, not just because of a project's complexity or anything like that, but also companies tend to want to change their features once they see how good something is that comes along. So if you're, take for instance, the touring app system you do, if you're making amazing lobbies and you're doing all sorts of wonderful stuff to show, they might have more ideas and features they want to add onto it, and doing a pay by hour, pay by day contract enables more flexibility. They can just keep hiring you to continue that on, rather than arguing over which feature should be dropped and which feature should be kept to keep within the budget that they spec'd out that you actually accepted. And you can have things like schedule of work, which will basically be a legal contract on what you expect to do and how fast you expect to do it. But again, if they're flexible enough to go per order, per day, per hour, per week or whatever, go with that. It just makes life a lot easier for everybody. In my experience, if you're one of these people that can go out and bang things out in a day and pretend you did it in 3 months, fair enough to you. But if something's super, super easy to do and they're willing to give you a huge chunk of change to do it, and they think it's going to take you a hell of a long time and you basically just do it over, that's fine. But if you deliver super early, that company might be a bit annoyed that they paid you so much money to do it. And you might not get that repeat business from that. And in the contract world, it's all about repeat business. I consider nearly every client I've had under Warped Imagination still my client. I often get phone calls where a client just wants me to come in and look at their new product strategy and how they're thinking of doing their business, or they're just about to pitch their company for funding at some particular location and they want me to come in and just listen to their pitch that they're about to do and go over it with them and make markers on it. So I always consider clients constant clients. Unless I dislike them, then I don't consider them clients anymore, and I don't accept their phone calls. But that's very, very rare.
Hopefully that's not a common occurrence.
No, not at all. I'd say there's only like one, but they were crazy people.
So if somebody's looking to start contracting, what do you recommend? Like, how would you recommend they get started or find their first contract? I don't know about you, like all of mine have just been kind of referrals. I never actually went out searching for contract work. So kind of curious what it looks like from that perspective.
Yeah, I've done both. So some of the work I've done has been referrals, where one client has referred me to another client, or I've met somebody at a hackathon, or a company has been approached about doing something and They don't have any experience in that, but I've done some work for them before, so they'll give me a ring to come in and co-chair or co-run that particular project for them. And then it's a client, sub-client basis sort of thing. The other thing is to go on to the various sites that are promoting jobs, and those can be part-time, full-time or contract jobs. You know, try not to annoy people by, if somebody says it's a full-time position in-house that's doing this many hours, running a team and all the rest of it, unless you're willing to go in there and do that, it's not really a contract, it's a position. And you can really start annoying people if you constantly apply for that, saying, I have a company that does this sort of thing. Because I get inundated by people saying, I have a company and I see you're advertising for this particular job. My company can take over the entire development for your software. Well, that's great, but I run a software company, so why the hell would I want to do that? But, you know, looking on things like if you're a Unity developer, and I pick up Unity a lot because it's something I use day to day as my engine that I use for various contracts that I pump up. They have a jobs board on there that has contracts coming up on a regular basis that you can apply to go and join. There are sites that enable you to post yourself as a contractor and people can bid and do the rest of it. I've never had to do that myself personally because, like you, Jason, a lot of my stuff just comes through referrals or through people I've met or people that just need me to come in and look at what their company's doing. But yeah, you can go onto those job sites and find something. The idea is also to be wary when you're doing that. I mean, when you go on, look at the company itself. Is it a legit company? When they talk about the actual job position, is it one of these, oh, well, we're going to do a rev share or you'll get paid when the thing comes out? Well, you know, 90% of stuff that goes out into the App Store fails. So you're probably going to be in one of those failure realms if you jump out with that. And if you're looking at rev share to pay your mortgage, you ain't paying your mortgage. So be careful with that sort of thing. Do a little bit of due diligence for every company you're actually applying for and every company that asks you to interview for them. Have they got a previous record of being arseholes to people? Then don't go work for them. Glassdoor is there to be your friend when it comes to that sort of thing, as long as you are careful about the sort of comments that you're reading there. Those are the points that I would pick up on that sort of thing. Make sure they can pay you, make sure they're a legitimate company, make sure you can run it, and then when you run it, make sure you're a good contractor that will get referred back to them.
Cool. That all sounds like good advice. For the payment stuff, do you normally do, well, you said you like to go hourly, so how do you usually work that out? Like if somebody's never contracted before, what should they expect? Should they expect to just get paid every couple of weeks, every month, or when the project's done, or some up front?
It can be very much down to the company by company basis as to what they do. For very short-term contracts, I tend to get paid on a weekly or bi-monthly, so 2 times a month basis from those particular companies, just because they're very short contracts and it's a very quick turnaround. But some of the larger companies, they have an accounting department, and that accounting department will determine when they actually can pay you out. And there's no way that a lot of the managers can get around that sort of thing. So oftentimes you might be looking at a 2-month window where after 1 month, you put in an invoice to that particular company for the amount of hours or whatever you've worked for them. And then a month later, you get paid from that. And that leads us to things like runways, making sure that you have enough money in your bank that you know that if you take on a contract, there's a possibility you might not get paid for 2 months going into that contract. Money up front barely ever happens. It can happen sometimes. If you think a company's properly shady and you don't want to touch them at all, you can request it. What's the worst that can happen? They can say no. And I've done it before where a company's approached me about doing something. I don't know them. They've not been referred to me by anybody. So being cheeky, I've turned around and said, right, you need to pay me a month in advance before I even start doing the work for you. And they were happy to do it, which surprised the hell out of me as well, you know, that they're willing to just put a month ahead with somebody they've heard of but never actually worked with before. But you can do that. If you're going to say no anyway, it doesn't hurt to ask that. and then do the work with a month in advance. But it's a very, very rare occurrence that will actually come off. Some companies will be very much about giving you a daily rate or a weekly rate, and that's fine. Just remember, you are a contractor. Don't give away your stuff for free. It's stupid if you're doing loads of crunch and you're not getting paid for it unless you absolutely adore the job that they're actually putting you through. If you're a contractor, if you're an employee and you love it and you're crunching, go ahead. I mean, I was in AAA for 7 years. I know what crunch is and I love doing it. But then I was single at the time, not anymore. So things change as you get older. But yeah, it's an easy way to do it. And you can shield yourself from some things by, setting up a company. For instance, I have a consultancy company where people sometimes work for me and I hire them out to other people, or I do the work myself where I go in and do work and they pay my company, and that can shield me from certain things that happen within the industry and enables me to have a better tax code at the end of the year for a lot of things as well.
Right. When do you recommend people make that jump to starting their own company?
Depends what you're looking to do as a company. If you're just looking to be a single contractor or whatever, it's not that hard a decision. As soon as you're going to start getting paid, set up an LLC, put yourself in it. And again, tax codes and everything vary with mileage. Go and see what's happening. I had a limited company in England. I have an LLC in America. Now I live here. And the various tax implications are different and the yearly tax codes are different. But
it varies from state to state too.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
It can be completely different in every state. What's the best option? So definitely talk to tax pros and find out what one's going to save you the most money.
And a lot of the times what I say to people is, don't set up a company until you're about to get paid or you're about to take investment. You can still protect your assets. You can still protect yourself in every single way. But if you're just about to take on a contract with somebody, then set it up. For instance, if you're going to build an indie games company, and your game is going to take 2 years to develop, don't set up the company ahead of time unless you're going to be able to pay people, or you need to pay people, or there's stuff that's going to happen where you're seeding the money or somebody's seeding the money into you. Simply because there's expenses that come with owning a company. I mean, you're in California, you're probably going to be paying $800 a year just to have that company.
That's a minimum.
Yeah, that's a minimum. Yeah.
Not counting the extra filing fees and all the other stuff. Yeah, exactly. It'll add up if you're not using it.
Yeah, exactly. And if you maybe set it up if you're going to have a ton of expenses coming in, because then you can expense them to your own company and run from there. Just don't be careful about what you're expensing, because I've seen people expense random stuff that shouldn't be expensed to a company. But, if you're going to have expenses or you're going to take money in, set your company up. Otherwise, don't waste your money until you're there and it's going. You could start an indie game and you're getting partway through, and then a company hires you and you go and do that company. Well, you just set up that LLC for nothing. You paid all your registration fees. You paid maybe 1 year's filing fee and all the rest of it, and then you are with another company and you don't need to use your indie game anymore. Or maybe you start developing that indie game for that company and they've given you some startup money for just joining their company, sort of acqui-hire, as it were. But just don't waste the money until you actually have to put the money in. And I do that with all the companies. If you're worried about branding your company and then somebody going and using your branding or whatever because you haven't owned the company, register the company name. It's perfectly legal to do. You can register that company name. Again, state by state, country by country, it varies. But in California, for instance, you can register the company name and you can hold that name for yourself. So that's one way of doing it. All the companies I have at the moment are registered and built. So I don't have to do that at the moment because they're all doing expenses.
I guess it's pretty rare that people steal your company name too.
Yeah, it's very rare. I've never heard of it happening, but if you're worried about any of that sort of thing,
you probably got some enemies.
File it or trademark it. Trademarking's not that expensive. It's got a little bit of expense to it, but it's not that expensive to do. But there are a lot of issues with trademarking on how you do it, etc. That would probably go into an entire podcast on its own, so probably not best bet of doing into that. If your company's going to be bigger than just yourself, yes, talk to a lawyer, talk to a tax professional to work out whether you want to go LLC, S Corp, C Corp, or the rest of it. Again, that could be an entire podcast on its own. But yeah, if you're an independent contractor, an LLC will do you good.
All right. And if you're looking to raise money, an LLC,
that can vary as well. Some investors prefer you to be a corp over an LLC for various reasons, depending on if you're going to file 501c and be a non-profit or whatever. That can be different as well. Funding, you can go LLC to corp. You can do the conversion over. Going back is incredibly difficult from what I hear. I've never had to do it myself. But funding, yeah, when you're doing that, you have to have a company in place to receive that funding and run with that funding. But again, you don't need to set that up until the checks are starting to come in. When somebody turns around and gives you a term sheet and you're about to accept that term sheet, file your company. Filing a company, especially in a place like California, takes next to no time to do. It's good to go in no time. You can set up a bank in no time to receive checks, etc. And no investor's going to blink an eye if it took you an extra week to put their check in, basically, unless it's the end of the year. Then they might actually give a shit because you've just messed with their tax filing statuses. So yeah, again, just don't set it up until you have to. But if you're receiving funding, you have to set up something.
Yeah, but you're saying that you can. Do you think you can generally wait to set that up, like while you're still getting the investors, or do they want to see that you already have the corporation and the whole structure set up in advance?
To be honest with you, most of the time with investors that I've had to speak to, and again, mileage varies. Some investors are arseholes, some investors are amazing. Luckily, I've dealt with a lot of the amazing ones and met only a few arseholes. But it tends to be the case that their main concern is the team and the product that you're creating. They're investing in what you're making, what problem you've solved as a company. That's their concern. Setting up a company is not a problem. It's something that's done very, very easily. But they will have to have that in place when they do their due diligence on your company. So be prepared as soon as you start talking term sheets, as soon as they start doing the due diligence, to have it in place. And again, they won't care if you've been working on this in the background for 3 years. You turn up, file the company, and then take their investment because the product's still there. So yeah, that's what I found.
Okay, that sounds like good advice to me. I mean, I've personally never needed to go look for funding, so I just go off of what I hear other people say, and I think your advice kind of sticks because it makes sense that they wouldn't care so much about that part because that's what they do all the time. And like you said, it is a relatively quick process to get that all set up and working. At least it is in California. So
yeah. And the funny thing about funding is it takes an awful long time to get somebody to fund your company, usually, unless you're lucky or amazing. But the checks turn around straight away. As soon as somebody says yes, the check turns up. It's not a long process to get this thing going. So yeah.
Nice. So I guess one thing I just wanted to jump back to was the getting a job. Like, I guess for people fresh out of college, just looking to find a new job. So they just graduated. They're maybe hopefully going to hackathons if they're in their area and trying to meet people and stuff. I always recommend user groups as well, like the meetup.com Unity user groups. But what other stuff would you recommend that they do just to try to get a job? Like, is there anything you would tell people to prepare or get ready for, like before they go in for an interview or before they submit their application to a place?
Yeah, I mean, if you've been to get that job and to get good enough to take that job, you know, as you say, join user groups, read tutorials, read blogs, build, experiment, do all the rest of it. Before you go into the actual applying for the job, one thing to look at is what the job application says itself. If they're asking for particular things, make sure those things appear in your CV if you really want that job. If you can't do those things, don't apply for the job. Go away, learn how to do it, come back and do it. Because otherwise you're just wasting people's time. If you're turning up to become a Unity developer at somebody's company and they're asking for a senior Unity developer, if you've never done it, don't wing it. You just piss people off at the end of the day.
But if they're applying for a junior one and they're going in, you're saying focus.
If you're applying for a junior, get the stuff in your CV, get it in your resume, etc. If you're applying for a Unity developer position and that Unity developer, Unity doesn't appear anywhere in your cover letter or anywhere in your resume, you might get flagged before you even get to the person. In a lot of the bigger companies, applications go through an HR department where they're filtered before they even appear to the developer. For instance, when I used to hire people when I was building teams at Sony, one of the things that would come up is I would basically write the job advert, everything I was looking at, that would go to the HR department and their legal group just to double check it over. Then it would get posted to various forums or through the internal talent acquisition team. That internal talent acquisition team or the HR department would receive the applications. They would then read through those applications and make sure that the terminology that was in the job advert appeared in those applications. And sometimes this is even done by AI screening, where they literally just throw it through something that reads it and checks whether those terms are actually turning up. And the reason for that is, not being an arsehole or anything like that, but when you get 1,000 applications, you ain't going to read 1,000 applications. So you basically have somebody pre-screen it before it gets to the developer or the manager that's actually hiring for that position, just because their time is valuable on looking at a lot of other things, and they only want to go through people that actually have listed the experience they're actually looking for. So make sure those terms turn up in the actual application form. You'll be surprised how many students I've met before that don't actually have some things in their resume or cover letter that they're actually applying to do.
I think that they know how to do, right?
Yeah.
They don't put them there. I've noticed, I was going to say, I do the same thing when I'm applying for stuff, or when I was applying for jobs, is I'll look at the specific position and then move the things that are specific to that job to the top too. So if I already have them in a list of skills or experience or something, if it's, hey, this is an MMO project, the MMO stuff is going to be at the top. If it's a mobile thing, all the mobile stuff is going to be at the top, right? And kind of focus it on, so that it feels more like your focus is what the thing that they're looking for is.
Yeah, exactly.
And that it stands out. They don't have to search to see if you meet the requirements.
And some games companies will also ask you if you play their games and how much you play their games and what you do with them. Famously, I think it's Blizzard, isn't it, that basically lists the games that you should be playing when you apply for the jobs at that particular company. I can't remember if it's Blizzard or Riot, one of those two. But in your cover letter, put that you play them. If you do play them, if you don't play them, go and start playing them and then apply on the next rotation. Because they'll look at what you've done. I mean, I know people that have applied to jobs at these places and they turn around and go, great, what's your username? Because they want to see if you've actually been playing the game or if you're just talking BS when you say you have. And also, if you're going to be a games developer, play games, and don't be afraid to talk about the fact you play games. I do know some games developers that don't play video games and they're perfectly good games developers. But if you're going to go in for a designer job or something like that, you better play games.
Designers need to be playing nonstop. And that point that you made on the playing the game, the good game designers that I know, if they apply for something, they're playing that game for like the month before it. And they're just playing that game and becoming an expert at the game that they're wanting to go work on. And then they apply and go get that job. Or, usually what'll happen is they'll go through a little bit of an interview process, play it a little bit. And if they get the actual interview, like in-person interview, they just buckle down and just play that game. And it may seem weird, like you're playing a game to prepare, but that's the job. You need to understand the product. It's basically researching the product.
Exactly. Yeah. And being a designer myself in video games, I play them constantly because you just have to. It's the only way you get better at being a games designer, really. Watching other games, seeing what people do and building them yourself to play through it. The other thing is as a coder, as an artist or a designer, be prepared to test at the interview. So, you know, look online. Reddit has an absolute ton of people talking about coding tests, math tests, art tests, design tests that people have experienced when they've applied to these positions. And everybody that comes in to work as a coder for me, for instance, will have a test put in front of them. And that's not because they're trying to whittle out as many people as they possibly can or anything like that. They're trying to make sure that, you know, you can do the thing before they waste a lot of time in bringing you into the company and realizing you can't do that. And also they're trying to work out what level you're at as well. So even when you're testing, if you see some questions that are super hard or way above what you can usually do, don't let that discourage you from what you're actually doing. You know, don't let it put you down in the interview or anything like that. I think that a lot more interviewers should say that the tests are more to work out where people are in their experience, rather than just whether it's a cutoff for people. Simply because I've seen some interviewees get frazzled because they couldn't answer the more hard question that came at the end. Or they didn't understand a particular thing, or they just didn't know what a particular item was that was being shown to them. Not everybody's going to 100% ace every test that comes across them. And if you don't get the job, or even if you get the job, one of the things I would say to every interviewee, when you go and do these tests, as soon as you leave the interview, write all the questions down that you can remember. Write all the questions down that you did in the test, and also that the interviewer asked you after the test and in your main interview. And then when you go for your next interview, make sure you can ace those things, because funnily enough, a lot of interviewers, when they go to work out what their test will be for a particular role, will also read the same Reddit passages you're reading, will still look at the same interview questions that everybody else is asking, especially interviewers that are new to interviewing. They'll go and do it if their company doesn't already have a framework. For instance, Sony had a framework, and we used to write the things down, and other people would use the same framework across the board. And that would usually be done by several lead developers that would write that thing out to find out where the person was in their particular level. And be prepared to do various tests. You know, I've heard of artists being asked to do art at the location, sitting next to an artist. I've heard of designers that when they turn up, they're given problems and asked how they would design around them, or how they would design a system. For instance, you might get asked, if you're going into doing a driving game, a car falls off the side of a cliff. Now you've got to reposition the player. How would you reposition the player? Where would they go? How would they start? Would it be a running start? Why would it not be a running start? Where would they be? And these aren't things to catch you out. They're just trying to see how you think about solving the problem. And it's the same for developers. They're looking for how you're going to problem solve that. There are some stupid questions that come around all the time when you're doing coding, like how does the Fibonacci sequence work and that sort of thing. And I know you and me, Jason, have laughed at sort of things we've been interviewed at before. I think it's quite funny that, you know, it's still, when I've interviewed in the past, like recent years, that people still ask me to do coding tests. It's kind of like, well, that's funny. I've released, 20 games, built 4 companies, but you should be prepared to do it at every stage. So even though we're talking about junior now, even when you reach the senior level, you'll still be asked to do these tests at the majority of your interviews. And sometimes you'll be asked to do even more. I mean, I've stood there with a panel of people behind a desk, been given a whiteboard marker and asked to solve problems in front of that panel of people for an entire day. Even at lunchtime, I was taken out by their HR department and they grilled me on how my managing skills work. It's part of the game, and treat it like a game. Go out of that. And I still did it. I left that interview. I wrote down all the questions that I had. Even I did it as a junior. I did it as a middle programmer. I do it now. I leave, answer all the questions, because if I'm going to interview at another place, I do it. I mean, I haven't done an interview in years, but every now and again somebody comes along and has an interesting job opportunity for me, and I will interview at that sort of thing. But yeah, that's what I would say to juniors. Keep going, and even if you fail, learn from how you failed at that particular interview. And don't be scared to ask the interviewer why you failed. Even if it's you've left the property and you've walked away and a day later they turn around and go, sorry, you didn't make the cut. Don't be, turn around and say, oh, well, I was really interested in the company. Why didn't I make the cut? I'm interested so I can become better. So, the next time around I can interview again if that's possible. Or, so I can learn because I really want to be in the games industry, and this will enable me to further my ambition and career by getting a job in the games industry to learn from my mistakes or how I felt. A lot of times you'll get feedback. The games industry, although multi-billion and all the rest of it, it's still at the heart of it is developers, hackers, innovators, people that want to see other people succeed as well, that love looking at what other people have managed to do, managed to build, etc. And I've met more coders and designers and artists that are willing to sit there and chat to somebody who's just starting out for hours to tell them how they should possibly look at joining this industry and how they should better themselves to it. So don't be afraid to ask how you failed so that you can progress yourself better in the next one.
Yeah, I think that's a really good advice there, just on the asking and following up too. Because when you brought that up, it reminded me of a job that I got years ago where I was in an interview, was asked a question, doing like live screen share coding, didn't know the answer to one of the questions. I was like, I'm not sure. I was like, I know how to do it one way, not the efficient way. It was one of those questions like, how do you do this the most efficient way? And I was like,
yeah.
I was like, I use dot reverse, right? Or whatever it was. It was something that there was an easy solution for, and then there was the harder way, and I couldn't remember that. And after the interview, like immediately after, I was like, I need to figure that out. So I went back through and started, spent the next 20 minutes just researching, coming up with a couple of solutions, sent those over, and ended up getting the job. And that actually helped a lot. Just the fact that I think the fact that I was interested enough to figure out what I didn't know, find out the answer, and then send it over, on top of the rest of the interview going relatively well, I think it really helped. And I think it's a good point, like just not giving up. And like if they see these questions, so if you see somebody that's struggling with a question on your test, right, like the hardest question there, would you rather they try to come up with an answer and make their best guess, or just give up? I assume it's the obvious of try, right?
Try, yeah, always try. Yeah.
I feel like what is their answer? Like what are they thinking of, at least, even if they don't know the answer? And I guess one last question on that subject would just be like, what kind of thing do you see people struggle with the most on interviews? Is there like a specific subject or sub-subject in Unity or game development that they really struggle with?
Looking at Unity, because I know your course basically focuses on Unity, the stuff that I find people struggle with is that they might have never done C# in their lives. And then they come to Unity and they're like, this is awesome, and I love getting into coding, and they'll read the Unity tutorials that Unity provides, and they'll do those, and they'll start getting good at doing that, but they always just focus in on those tutorials, and they don't learn around what the terms were in those tutorials that they're actually doing. So then they come to look at a job, and the test might turn up, and the tester might say, right, okay, I'm going to give you a bit of a test in C#. It's a primary language in Unity that you need to know to develop. And if you don't know how some of just the methodology of OOP works, or how certain things work in C# efficiently, you're not going to do so well in those tests. And a lot of times where I've interviewed people, I found that, yes, their Unity knowledge might be quite good because they've run through the tutorials, but then when I ask them just how to make something a little bit more efficient, their C# starts to fall over. And, they'll be doing string comparisons everywhere, they didn't know to hash it or do something like that. And Unity, this is the funny thing about Unity. You look at something like the animator class, and all the tutorials that they'll show you for the animator class, where they'll say animator.setTrigger, and then you put in the string that sets the trigger, etc. That's great and all, but you can make that more efficient by actually having string to hash above, keeping it as a constant, and then pumping that ID into the set trigger class. And the next thing you know, it's a more efficient thing. Yeah, it's not going to save a ton of time. And people argue back and forwards as to whether, oh, should I be making this level of efficiency? But if you know it, it doesn't hurt to write it. And if you're just efficient at that sort of level, and I'm not talking about efficiency to the point of obscurity in the code, that's very obvious when you look at it, what it's actually doing. It's not obscuring anything that actually happens. But because Unity only goes to a certain point, hence why college courses like the course you're doing here are better, because they actually give you a more in-depth knowledge on what actually something does, rather than you just go, well, I know it does that, I don't know how it does that. Well, do a bit of research, be inquisitive. When you're reading a tutorial from Unity, break it apart, assess everything they're doing, and write cleaner code than some of their things is, and learn about clean code and commenting and the rest of it from various tutorials and senior developers that have done it in the past, not to learn from their mistakes, because every developer fails. I've done loads of things that have been buggy and crashed and all the rest of it, and I've learned from those errors. If you want, when you're looking at a profiler of your game, learn why your game spikes and know how to fix those sort of things. It's a question that comes up quite often in interview questions. I'll put stupid stuff in the question, like putting find object of type in an update loop, just to see if the person that's reading the question goes, well, yeah, there's a big efficiency thing that I can change. I can cache that thing at the very start function, and then just use it in the update after that point. It's things like that you should just learn why they're bad to do in that sort of way, why you should do something in an update loop rather than a coroutine or whatever, things like that. So don't take the tutorials you see online from Unity or whoever as golden. Break them apart. Get yourself a C# course and do that as well. It won't hurt. It will only make you better. Knowing about nullable variables, for instance, can actually make you better at writing timers in Unity, whereas it's never mentioned in Unity or any of their tutorials, but it's a C# constant.
People don't know about nullable variables. There's so many things. It's interesting because I, like you, I think, did a lot of C# before Unity. I did a lot of non-game development work in C# for game companies, but gaming tools and stuff like that, and also some enterprise stuff. And you do definitely pick up some different habits and some different tricks and skills, I think, in that side where you're working with things like scalable web pages or UIs that are in Windows or whatever. You get different tricks and different patterns that sometimes really map really well into Unity, and you definitely don't learn those along the way because they're just not talked about very often.
No, they're not. And a lot of times when I interview somebody, I can see whether they were a C or a C++ coder before they even touched C#, just from simply how they declare their variables. And you can just see that coming through, and the way they do certain things when it comes to efficiency, the way they declare things and wrap things and autonomize things and all the rest of it. You can tell the seniority of a programmer generally from just looking at a piece of code. Because as they say, every coder has a unique signature to how they code. Well, in that unique signature, you tend to be able to see how much they can actually do just from a simple piece of code.
So yeah, what I was going to say was just that I've seen the same thing with C and C++ developers versus C# developers who do web services or websites, or like guys that work at Microsoft, versus people who've worked only on games their entire life, either C++ games or C# games in Unity. And you see a totally different set of patterns and a different coding style between them, even in some projects that I've worked on with primarily C++ developers. And, some are C++, some are C#. And the coding styles, the way everything comes together is very different, I guess. And like my personal preference is more of, I guess, more towards the Microsoft-y, separated out design patterns type stuff, but then mixed in with some of the performance benefits that you see generally in games that are totally not talked about outside of game development. Because
I'm completely with you as well. Yeah, that's it's the line between clean code and efficient code that should just be, and especially when you're working in big teams, etc. And I know a lot of people that I've worked with in the past that would probably kill me for that statement, but that's, working in a team is easier if it is done that way. The other thing that's funny is when you see somebody who's not used Unity before and they're a C# developer outside of games or anything like that, and then they come to Unity and go, "What do you mean .NET 2?" And then it starts to freak them out. But obviously the new .NETs are in now in 2018 in a beta version. I think they're still beta. But that's also the funny thing where you go to try and do something and you're just like, wow, I can't do this in Unity because it doesn't exist.
Well, recently, I've only been using the latest one, and it's almost the latest C# now, which is nice.
I've still got some legacy games that are still being produced that still have the other one that I can't.
Just delete them and start over.
Yeah, exactly.
On those legacy ones,
because there's so much code there. That should never be a reason not to do it. But also, when you're a startup, you've got to put your money where the action is, as it were. So just when it still works perfectly well and works excellently, is not worth it when you've got 101 other things that need to get addressed at the particular company.
Totally, yeah. And I was just kidding for anybody listening out there. Definitely don't start over just for the .NET upgrade, but it is really nice starting to use some of the new C# features, especially with Writer, because it just auto recommends all the new C# features, which is beautiful. So the code just comes out looking cleaner, and yeah, I like it. I'm happy with it.
Yeah,
but I've also seen that problem with C# developers who come into Unity and struggle because not so much just the .NET profile, but the patterns and the way that you do things being pretty different, and that requirement to really be performance aware and think about these things when you're coding and not just do everything in code. That's something that I think people struggle with a lot, especially the not doing everything in code. Because I've brought in web developers, Windows developers, and they tend to start recreating all of the things that are already in the editor. I've seen people try to write physics collision checks. I'm like, no, it's a component. You add it. It's already there. And it's faster than anything you're going to make.
Yeah, exactly. And also being able to update on the fly without having to recode and recompile and run the game again it's a huge benefit. I expose a lot of the variables that I do on a class because I literally am going, if I think I'm going to change them in game, I will expose it. It doesn't hurt. And by expose, I mean keep it private, serialized field, all the rest of it. But not make it hugely public and make everybody want to change it all over every other class. But I'll do that, even though I might be the only coder on that particular thing, simply because when I press run, it means that I can go and change, how long that blocking timer works, or how this thing's maybe things that I would have used to have made a constant and kept it like that, and then gone and changed it in code on every single time. I might make expose so that I can simply change it in play, because going back and changing the constant and then running the game again, especially for something that might be 2-3 minutes into the gameplay or something like that, is just hell that I don't want to have to deal with anymore. I mean, I've written my own game engine. I know how much of a hell it was back then, and I'm not about to go and do that again. Unity's there, and it's one of the things that's the benefit of it.
Yeah, definitely. I do the same thing. Just make them accessible so I can go in there and tune things and tweak them. And then if I get them to a solid level where I'm not going to change them anymore, just remove that serialized field tag and turn them into constants or something. But it's a huge time saver too. You're definitely right on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, definitely the way to go. And yeah, definitely don't make them all public. And I think it also works really well when you're in a small team and you can explain these things so that people don't go changing those values and setting them, not knowing what to do.
And that's one of the wonderful things about the attributes that Unity has, things like serialized field and tooltip.
Tooltip is the winner.
Miss all the time. Write your comment in the tooltip so that when somebody puts their mouse over on one of the variables and it says, this particular variable is going to do the timer for this, so they don't have to guess from the name, even if the name's pretty accurate onto what it's going to do. A tooltip that pops up and tells them how it works is a massive benefit for people that might be using your thing, and also for you. If you're coding 1,000 classes or whatever thing you're going to do, 1,000 classes might be a bit much, but if you're coding even 30 classes, going back 2 weeks back in development, if you're a decent coder, you probably could have forgotten that because you would have written a ton of other stuff by that particular point. Having those tooltips is amazing.
Yeah, I used to make them mandatory for all my code when I'm working with game designers, especially if they need to go in and do it. Like the time that it takes you to write in that tooltip be saved, the time to write all those tooltips would be saved, and the time that one designer asks you what one of those things means, and you have to go look, and then you don't remember, then you have to go look at the code and see what it's doing. Just put the tooltip in there. They don't even have to come to you, if you get to that point.
Yeah. And funnily enough, one of the questions I put up in one of my interviews, to go back to like people interviewing the companies and that sort of thing, is just literally to say, what's a C# attribute? Because Unity developers that have come in and just gone straight into Unity and not learned C#, they just add these things all over the place because they're in the tutorials, require component there, serialized field there, tooltip there, and that sort of thing. But they don't know what they are. And they're super powerful. And actually going in and creating your own attributes to help with the editor functions, or help with compilation or whatever, to do various other bits, or dynamics or whatever. It's a massive benefit. So one of the questions I put in my tests is, what's a C# attribute? And I tell you what, I can pretty much judge just from that one question as to whether somebody came in C# to Unity, or whether they came in Unity and learned C# to do Unity. Because Unity never mentions that they're a C# attribute.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was actually working on making one 2 days ago for some profiling. So I could just put an attribute over a method and have it automatically profiled on a server profiler. So that's a great question. I never even thought to ask that. And I think it really gets to that point of knowing if they were a C# developer first. Because, developers just think that those are magic Unity specific things a lot of the time. They don't realize that they exist outside of there.
Yeah, and you can do amazing editor level stuff with C# attributes. If you're making a node-based system for a particular game for something, so you help the designers out a lot, you can do a lot of that dynamic stuff just pulling off those C# attributes and having it run in the editor. These things aren't going to go all the way out to your game. They're not going to hurt you in the long run, but in the editor, I mean, that comes from, and for you as well, probably from being a tools programmer back in the day, building applications in C#, knowing that those attributes, when it comes to the editor level stuff, are vital.
Yeah, I've seen some crazy apps outside of Unity using attributes like that for everything, just to totally control the things. I mean, I've seen it to the point where it gets extensive and crazy, where there's like 5 or 10 on everything, and that's like the way that it's coded. I think that's a little bit too much, but yeah, they're huge. And outside of Unity, and even in some Unity stuff, you can do injection. So you can actually inject things on build that runs like at the beginning and end of your methods, or when something else happens with your method. And those are the ones that I really love, outside of all the editor extension stuff that you can do.
Yeah, I mean, even just looking at those editor ones, if you're writing something that's a blocking timer or something like that, so it's a flow, and then you put serialized field to say that it comes up in the editor, and then you go and do tooltip to say what the thing is actually doing, and then you go and put range to put a range between 0 and 10 or whatever, and then you look at the editor and suddenly you've got a slider popping up there, and everything's nice and you're floating over it. That's 3 attributes right there, and now that designer is loving you because he or she's not wondering why they've added 20 and suddenly the thing's not running anymore because the range was 0 to 10. That's they're amazing. They're amazing.
That range attribute is probably tooltip is probably the most important, and then range, the most useful at least. You get that nice clamping, and it's all good stuff. Cool. Well, I don't know. I've run out of things. I don't know if you have anything else you want to talk about before we wrap it up? We've been going for a while.
No, I can go on forever talking about everything. If anybody has any comments or questions or anything like that, they can always get back to you, and we can do another one of these things. I'm always happy to pop back on and talk more about, you know, funding or pitch sheets or how to build a startup or whatever outside of the general Unity thing. The one thing I would say is, you know, bear in mind, people that are working with Unity, Unity isn't just for gaming. And they've shown that at the latest Unite conference, where they're showing stuff to do with cars and the rest of it. I've personally used Unity in many things outside of gaming. Displays that go up on the Super Bowl, displays that are shown in Lollapalooza, real estate tours and virtual reality applications. Using Unity, it's not a game, but Unity was an ideal source for building that thing without having to write it from scratch. So if you're looking at contracts or anything like that, don't just stick to the game industry. You know, think outside the box about what you can develop with this thing. Even my simulators, some of those run with Unity connections, because you can do that stuff with Unity. And if you can't do it with Unity, you can wrap it in a C++ wrapper and get it going. You know, there are amazing things you can do beyond the tutorials that they actually give you and beyond the uses they use it for. So bear that in mind.
Yeah, that's great advice. I do a lot of my projects are non-game stuff too, and I find that Unity is a perfect fit for that. Get great visuals, and it's all C#, and yeah, I love it. Thanks again for that, and definitely if anybody has questions for Dave or other stuff, just drop them in here, and we'll do a follow-up sometime soon and talk some more. All right, thanks again, Dave. Really appreciate it.